The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the Turner Ranch. Caleb Turner, a man who had spent his entire life taming the wilderness and raising cattle, paused in the middle of repairing a broken fence. At 71, the desert and its elements had carved their marks into his hands and face, but his eyes remained sharp and vigilant. Life here was predictable. Dangerous, yes, but predictable. Until the knocking came. It was faint at first, almost hesitant, then insistent, pounding against the door like a desperate plea. Caleb frowned. Nobody came to the Turner Ranch unannounced, not in these parts. Most strangers kept to themselves, wary of the isolation. Yet this knock carried urgency. Fear, something beyond simple trouble. Caleb set down his hammer and wiped his hands on his jeans, squinting toward the fading light. The desert wind tugged at the door, carrying dust and the faint scent of smoke from distant hills. When he opened it, he nearly staggered back. A boy, no older than 10, stood there trembling, his clothes torn and caked with dirt. His hair was matted, and his wide eyes darted nervously across the surrounding land, as if expecting danger to leap out at any moment. Caleb's rough hands instinctively reached out to steady him, but the boy collapsed into his arms before he could speak. "Mister, if they come, please hide my mom." The boy gasped, voice breaking under the weight of terror. Caleb felt a shock of anger flare inside him, sharp and immediate. Whoever they were, whoever dared to threaten a mother and child on his land, would soon learn that Caleb Turner was not a man to be trifled with. But first, he had to get the boy inside. "Easy there, son. Easy," Caleb murmured, carrying the trembling child into the warmth of the ranch house. He settled the boy onto the old leather couch near the fireplace and handed him water from a battered canteen. The boy drank greedily, then swallowed hard, still trembling. "My name Mateo," he said finally, voice barely audible. "My mom, she's out there. We were walking through the desert, trying to get to the border, and then they came. Men in a truck, guns. They said she had to come with them. I ran. She told me to run too. She's gone." Caleb's chest tightened. He had spent decades braving storms, wildfires, and predators, but the fear and helplessness in Mateo's eyes stirred a protectiveness he had thought long buried. "Mateo," he said, placing a firm hand on the boy's shoulder, "you did exactly what she asked. You survived, and now we find her. That's what matters." Mateo blinked, tears brimming, and nodded. You'll help us." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "No one gets taken on my land. Not while I'm breathing. Understand?" Mateo nodded again, pressing his face into Caleb's hand. The old man's heart ached. He had lived alone for years, the silence of the desert his constant companion. And yet, in that moment, he realized that solitude without action in the face of injustice was meaningless. He would act. Night fell quickly over the Turner Ranch, the air cooling and the stars appearing like scattered jewels above the mesas. Caleb waited until darkness fully cloaked the land before he prepared to move. Mateo clutched a tattered blanket, eyes wide with fear and anticipation. Where is she?" he asked. "We'll find her," Caleb said, voice calm but resolute. "First, we need to keep hidden. Stay low, stay quiet, and trust me." They slipped out of the house, shadows among shadows. Caleb led Mateo through the brush, careful to use the uneven terrain and natural cover to conceal their movements. The boy's small hand held his tightly, trembling, but Caleb's grip was steady. In the distance, a truck's headlights carved through the desert night. Caleb's jaw tightened. The men were searching, and they were close. "They're looking for us," Mateo whispered, fear lacing his words. "Not for long," Caleb replied. His mind raced as he scanned the terrain. A ridge ahead offered concealment, and beyond it, a dry wash that could lead them closer to safety. Caleb had spent decades memorizing these lands. Every crevice, every shadow could be an advantage if used wisely. They reached the ridge just as the truck passed below, oblivious to the two figures moving silently above. Caleb exhaled slowly. For now they were safe. But time was short. Mateo's mother was out there, and they could not wait until dawn. He needed to act. Stay here, Caleb instructed, guiding Mateo to a shallow alcove behind a boulder. Do not make a sound. Whatever happens, do not move. Mateo nodded, gripping his blanket tightly. Caleb took a deep breath and crept toward the ridge's crest alone. And then he saw her. Mateo's mother. She was crouched behind a rock near the dry riverbed, fear etched across her face. She froze when she noticed him, eyes darting toward the distant truck. "Ma'am," Caleb called softly, hands raised. "I'm here to help. You're not safe out here. Come with me quietly." She hesitated, fear and instinct battling in her eyes. "I can't, they'll see me," she whispered. "They won't," Caleb said firmly. "Follow me, and we'll get you out of sight." With cautious steps, she joined him, and together they moved toward the alcove where Mateo waited. When the boy saw his mother, he bolted toward her, tears streaming, sobbing in relief. Caleb watched, heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. He had only done his duty, but this reunion, this fragile, precious moment, felt like a victory against the cruelty of the world. But the night was far from safe. The truck had stopped and the men were searching. Caleb's mind raced. If they moved now, they could be spotted. He needed a distraction. Taking a deep breath, he ran back toward the ridge, kicking up dust and firing his revolver into the air. The sound echoed across the desert canyon, drawing the men's attention. Shouts followed, chaos in the night, confusion on their side. Caleb had bought the family precious time. He returned to the alcove, guiding Mateo and his mother through the rocks toward a hidden path he had used in his youth. By sunrise, they reached an old service road that led to the ranger station several miles away. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but they moved swiftly, knowing daylight would increase the risk of detection. Caleb kept them low, navigating the route with precision. Mateo stumbled, but his mother held him, steadying him with gentle words, trusting Caleb's lead. When they finally reached the ranger station, a small building tucked into the desert's edge, the authorities quickly took the mother and child into safe care. Caleb stood back, watching them disappear inside, his chest tight with relief and an unfamiliar ache. In saving them, he had broken decades of solitude. He had acted, and in doing so, had rediscovered the purpose of his life. Not fences, not herds, not the vast expanse of land, but courage, humanity, and the power of one person to protect the vulnerable. Weeks later, a letter arrived. Mateo's mother wrote of their safety, of slowly reclaiming normalcy, and of Mateo's joy at school and new friends. Photographs accompanied the note, Mateo laughing, his mother strong, smiling. Caleb held them close, eyes wet, a quiet smile on his weathered face. He realized then that true measure was not in survival, but in the lives one touched, the courage one displayed, and the love one could offer without hesitation. The sun set over the Turner Ranch again, painting the desert gold. Caleb walked to his porch, the wind carrying the scent of sage and dust, and whispered, "Over my dead body, indeed." This time, it was not a threat but a promise. A promise that courage, kindness, and humanity could endure, even in the harshest, most desolate places. The desert, once silent and indifferent, had become a witness to hope. And in the stillness of the desert night, Caleb understood that the world could be cruel, yet it was never beyond redemption. One person's bravery could ripple across lives, transforming fear into safety, despair into hope, and uncertainty into the fragile, enduring certainty of survival and love. The first light of dawn crept over the mesas, painting the desert in pale shades of gold and gray. Caleb Turner had spent the night restless, the events of the previous hours running through his mind like a relentless storm. Mateo and his mother were safe for now, secured at the ranger station, but the men who had pursued them were still out there, ruthless and determined. Caleb knew that safety was temporary. The desert could be beautiful, serene, even forgiving, but it could also be merciless, and danger had a way of returning when least expected. Caleb had returned to his ranch that morning with a sense of urgency he hadn't felt in decades. His heart still pounded with adrenaline, and every sound of wind through the sagebrush or creak of the gate made him instinctively tense. Mateo's mother had called the previous evening, her voice steady yet laced with exhaustion. She thanked him for risking everything, but Caleb had replied with quiet resolve, "It's not over yet. Stay alert. Don't let your guard down." By mid-morning, the desert heat was already climbing. Caleb checked the perimeter of his ranch, scanning the horizon for any signs of the men. His mind replayed every step they had taken during the rescue. The careful navigation through rocky ridges, the tense wait in the shadows, the sound of the truck's tires echoing through the canyon. If the men returned, he had to be ready. A distant cloud of dust on the horizon caught his attention. Caleb squinted, recognizing the movement immediately. A truck, barreling toward the ranch along an old dirt road. His hands tightened into fists. They had tracked him here, hoping to find the boy and his mother, and now they were approaching the only man who had stood in their way. Caleb knew he had to act fast. He returned to the house and gathered supplies: a flashlight, a revolver he had used decades ago, a rope, and blankets. Mateo's mother had mentioned in her call that the boy had been talking about the ranch nonstop, about learning from Caleb, about wanting to see the wild horses and the hills. He couldn't allow them to come here. Not here, not ever. Mateo arrived soon after, his small face flushed with worry. He had been sent for a morning errand and had seen the dust cloud in the distance. "Mr. Caleb," he shouted as he ran, "they're coming. I think they're coming back." Caleb pulled the boy into the house, closing the doors behind them. "Quiet," he said, voice low and firm. "Listen. You stay here. I need to make sure we're ready. Can you do that?" Mateo nodded quickly, eyes wide. "I will, I promise." The first truck crested the rise near the barn. Caleb's heart thumped in his chest. The men were closer than he expected. They slowed as they approached, scanning the land, but the ranch's wide, open spaces and natural barriers made it difficult for them to identify where anyone might be hiding. Caleb knew the desert intimately. He had spent a lifetime mapping every bluff, every ridge, every hidden trail. And tonight, that knowledge would become their shield. He led Mateo and his mother to a narrow canyon behind the barn, where shadows pooled like ink and rocks created natural cover. "Stay close," he whispered. "Do exactly as I say, and you'll be safe." The men stopped at the edge of the property, shouting orders, trying to intimidate anyone who might be hiding. Caleb felt his blood boil, but he kept his voice steady as he spoke to Mateo and his mother. "Remember, fear is only dangerous if you let it control you. Stay quiet, follow me and trust me. That's the only way out." For the next several hours, Caleb guided them through the desert, taking routes that were narrow, steep, and treacherous, but safe if navigated with care. Mateo's mother clutched the boy's hand, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the men, while Caleb led them silently, pointing out small changes in terrain that could give them cover. Mateo's small hand held onto his mother's tightly, trusting her, trusting Caleb, and trusting that courage could overcome even the most frightening odds. They paused near a dry riverbed, rocks forming a natural wall to conceal them from view. The wind carried distant voices. The men had split up, searching methodically. Mateo shivered. "Will they find us?" he whispered. "They won't," Caleb replied firmly. "I'll make sure of it. You both have to trust me." Hours stretched into a tense game of waiting and careful movement. Caleb used every trick he had learned over a lifetime, masking their scent with sage, moving silently over loose sand, timing each step with the wind and the shifting shadows. Mateo and his mother followed, exhausted but obedient, their trust in Caleb unwavering. At one point, a coyote emerged from the brush, eyes gleaming, teeth bared. Mateo gasped and pressed close to his mother. Caleb motioned for them to stay still. The coyote froze, assessing them, then slunk away into the shadows. Caleb exhaled slowly, heart still pounding. Every encounter, every small obstacle, felt amplified by the fear that the men could find them at any moment. By mid-afternoon, they reached a narrow canyon that Caleb knew led to an abandoned ranger outpost. It was a long, treacherous path, but it was the only place he trusted for safety. They moved with painstaking care, navigating the rocks and shadows, their progress slow but deliberate. Every sound, the wind rattling the rocks, the soft crunch of sand underfoot, was magnified in their awareness. Matteo's mother whispered constant reassurances to her son, while Caleb's eyes scanned every ridge, anticipating the men's approach. As they neared the outpost, the sound of the truck grew faint in the distance. Caleb allowed himself a brief sense of relief, but he knew it was temporary. The desert was vast, but it also funneled movement into predictable paths. The men could still intercept them. Caleb's muscles ached, his joints stiff, but he pressed forward, leading them to the shelter that could mean the difference between life and death. Inside the outpost, Caleb reinforced the doors and windows, using whatever materials he could find to create barriers. Matteo curled up against his mother, exhausted beyond words. Caleb stood at the doorway, scanning the horizon. The men were nowhere in sight, at least for now, but he could feel their presence in the desert. The knowledge that they were relentless, that they had not given up, and that they would continue searching. The family spent the night in tense silence. Caleb kept watch, listening to every sound, ready to act if danger returned. He thought about his own life. Years of solitude, storms weathered, and nights spent alone. And realized that for the first time, he had something worth fighting for beyond survival. The lives of this boy and his mother. By morning, the desert was alive with light, and Caleb allowed himself a cautious optimism. They were safe for the moment, and he could plan their next move. Matteo, despite exhaustion, had a faint smile as he helped his mother gather water and rations. The boy's resilience amazed Caleb, a testament to the courage that could exist even in the smallest hearts. Caleb mapped out a route to the nearest town, where authorities could intervene more effectively. Knowing it would be a long, dangerous trek, the men might still pursue them, but Caleb's knowledge of the desert gave him an edge. He felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer about simple survival. It was about guiding a family to safety, about standing against cruelty, and about teaching a boy and his mother that courage and trust could prevail even in the darkest moments. As they set out from the outpost, Caleb glanced back at the rugged landscape that had once been his prison of solitude. Now it was a battleground, a place of testing, where bravery, strategy, and heart had combined to protect those who could not protect themselves. Matteo and his mother moved close, their trust in him evident in every step, and Caleb felt a surge of determination stronger than any fear he had ever known. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, but together, they would navigate it, and together, they would survive. The men's truck remained in the distance, a persistent shadow on the horizon. Caleb tightened his grip on his revolver and whispered to himself, "Over my dead body." Not as a threat, but as a vow. He would stand, no matter the cost, between this family and the darkness that hunted them. And in that moment, he realized that true courage was not about avoiding danger. It was about facing it head on to protect what mattered most. The desert sun had climbed high, scorching the earth and forcing Caleb to squint against the harsh light. Matteo and his mother followed closely, their shadows stretching long across the cracked sand. The ranger outpost offered temporary safety, but Caleb knew it could not hold forever. The men who had pursued them were cunning, patient, and ruthless, and he could not afford a single misstep. Every ridge, every rock, every whisper of wind could betray them. Caleb led them along a hidden trail he had memorized decades ago, a route that wound between jagged cliffs and narrow canyons. The path was treacherous, filled with loose stones and deep crevices, but it offered the best chance to stay out of sight. Matteo stumbled several times, his small legs unable to keep pace with Caleb's long strides. Each time, Caleb caught him, steadying the boy with firm hands and a quiet voice. "Keep moving, Matteo. Stay close, and we'll make it." Hours passed. The heat bore down relentlessly, and their water supply dwindled. Caleb rationed it carefully, giving Matteo and his mother small sips and keeping the remainder for emergencies. They rested briefly in the shade of a narrow canyon, hearts pounding with exhaustion and fear. Mateo's mother leaned against the rock, brushing sweat from her forehead, and whispered, "Do you think they'll catch us?" Caleb shook his head, eyes scanning the horizon. "Not if we stay smart. We have the advantage. They know the roads, but we know the desert. It's not easy to chase someone who knows every ridge and shadow." Mateo clutched his mother's hand tightly. "I don't want to lose her again," he said softly, voice trembling. "You won't," Caleb replied firmly. "I won't let that happen." As they continued, the distant sound of a truck reached Caleb's ears. His jaw tightened. The men had split up. One group was likely trying to flank them, while another followed the obvious routes. Caleb scanned the terrain and spotted a narrow passage between two cliffs that could serve as a trap. He motioned for the family to follow. "Quickly," he whispered. "Through here. It's tight, but they can't follow us through." The passage narrowed until they had to squeeze single file. Caleb went first, pushing stones aside to ensure the path was clear. Mateo followed, pressed close against his mother. The tight space forced them into slow movement, but it was their best chance to evade detection. Behind them, the sound of the truck grew louder, then faded as the vehicle tried to maneuver around the cliffs. Caleb allowed himself a brief surge of hope. They had shaken them, at least temporarily. Hours later, they emerged into a dry riverbed, a ribbon of sand and rocks cutting through the desert. Caleb's eyes flicked constantly, watching for any movement, any hint that the men had tracked them this far. Mateo and his mother moved cautiously, relying entirely on Caleb's guidance. Each step required care. The desert was filled with hidden pitfalls, loose stones, and sudden drop-offs. One misstep could mean injury or exposure. At a bend in the riverbed, Caleb halted. Ahead, the men's truck appeared on a ridge, scanning the terrain. Caleb's heart pounded. They had not yet detected the family, but one mistake could reveal them. He crouched low, motioning for Mateo and his mother to do the same. "We'll wait for them to pass," he whispered. The minutes stretched, each one heavy with tension. Caleb held his breath as the truck crested the ridge, its occupants shouting and gesturing. The men's frustration was evident. They were skilled, but the desert was unpredictable, and Caleb had used its secrets to his advantage. Once the truck passed, Caleb guided the family forward, careful to stay low and use every shadow as cover. By late afternoon, the desert landscape began to change. Small hills and gullies offered more protection, but the heat was relentless, sapping their strength. Caleb paused by a large boulder, letting Mateo and his mother rest. "Drink slowly," he instructed, passing small amounts of water. "We have to stay alert." Suddenly, a noise echoed across the canyon, a shout, a tire crunching over rocks. The men had split up, and one group had found a possible trail. Caleb's instincts kicked in. "Move," he commanded. "Now." They sprinted through the gullies, Caleb leading, weaving between rocks and using the terrain to hide their approach. Mateo stumbled, falling hard on the sand, but Caleb scooped him up instantly. "Keep going," he urged, voice steady despite his own exhaustion. Mateo's mother followed, carrying her fear and fatigue but trusting Caleb completely. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows, Caleb found a narrow cave nestled in the cliffs. It was small but sufficient for temporary refuge. They entered, brushing themselves against the rough walls and huddling together. The cave provided cover, and the sound of the truck faded in the distance. For a moment, they allowed themselves to breathe. Mateo clutched Caleb's arm. "Will they find us here?" he asked, eyes wide. "They won't," Caleb replied. "This place is hidden. They won't see it unless they stumble right over it. We just have to be patient and quiet." A night fell, and the desert cooled. The family huddled together, shivering slightly but safe for the moment. Caleb kept watch, listening to every sound. The wind, the distant howl of coyotes, the faint rustle of sand. He thought about the life he had led alone, about the storms he had endured, and realized that these moments, protecting Mateo and his mother, were more meaningful than anything else he had done. Courage, he understood, was not just about facing danger. It was about standing when others could not. By morning, Caleb had planned their next move. They needed to reach the nearest town, where authorities could help them permanently. The desert path was longer and more treacherous, but it was safer than the obvious routes the men would anticipate. Mateo's mother gathered what supplies they had, and Caleb instructed them carefully on the path. Every step had to be calculated, every pause deliberate. The journey was grueling. The desert heat rose, sand burned their feet, and the rocky terrain tested their endurance. Yet Caleb pressed on, carrying Mateo when the boy faltered, guiding his mother when the path became too difficult. Every obstacle was a test, every rock a potential trap, yet they persevered. Caleb's knowledge of the land allowed them to avoid exposure and keep ahead of the men who still pursued them from a distance. Finally, in the late afternoon, the outline of the town appeared on the horizon. A small cluster of buildings, a place where help awaited, and where the family could finally find safety. Caleb smiled, a rare expression of relief, but he remained vigilant. They had made it this far, but he knew the final stretch could be the most dangerous. As they approached, Mateo ran ahead, laughing for the first time in days. His mother followed, a smile breaking through her exhaustion. Caleb stayed slightly behind, ensuring no one was following. When they reached the town, authorities received them and confirmed their safety. Caleb felt a strange emptiness. He had spent weeks guiding them, protecting them, and now his role was complete. Yet, in that emptiness was pride and satisfaction. They were alive and he had kept his promise. That night, Caleb returned to his ranch, the desert silent and serene once more. He gazed across the land, the mesas silhouetted against the star-studded sky. "Over my dead body," he whispered, a vow renewed, not as a threat, but as a promise that courage, love, and human decency would endure. The desert had tested him, but he had passed, standing firm for those who could not defend themselves. And as the wind carried the faint scent of sage and sand, Caleb Turner knew that the world, even in its harshest and loneliest corners, could still be a place of hope, bravery, and unwavering humanity. The town's small streets were quiet in the early morning, the sun casting soft light over the modest buildings. Caleb Turner had stayed just long enough to ensure Mateo and his mother were safe in the care of the local authorities. They had found temporary housing, food, and protection from those who had hunted them across the desert. For the first time in weeks, Mateo's mother could breathe without the constant shadow of fear. Caleb watched them from a distance, the boy waving to him with a shy grin while his mother adjusted the blanket around Mateo's shoulders. The sight stirred something deep in Caleb, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. In his solitude, he had always thought of his life as measured by fences repaired, cattle tended, and storms weathered alone. Yet now, he realized that true measure came not from enduring hardship alone, but from standing for someone else, risking everything to protect life, and offering kindness without hesitation. The family's gratitude had been overflowing. Mateo's mother spoke of Caleb's courage and resourcefulness, of how he had navigated the desert with precision, guiding them through danger and uncertainty. Mateo recounted stories of how Caleb had reassured him in moments of fear, teaching him to stay calm, to think clearly, and to trust in something larger than himself. Listening to these tales, Caleb felt a quiet pride, not in his own heroism, but in the courage the family had shown alongside him. The mother's strength, the boy's resilience, and the trust they placed in one man who chose to stand for them. After ensuring they were settled, Caleb returned to the Turner Ranch, the familiar landscape stretching out before him. The desert, once only a place of solitude and harsh survival, now felt alive with possibility. Every ridge, every bluff, every sprawling mesa seemed to hum with the echoes of the past weeks. Of danger faced, courage displayed, and lives forever altered. He wandered through his fields, feeding the cattle, repairing fences, and performing the rituals of his life. But there was a new lightness in his steps. He had been alone for so long, yet he now understood that connection, purpose, and the act of protecting others could create meaning even in the loneliest of landscapes. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert in gold and crimson, Caleb was surprised by a familiar sight: Mateo, running along the dirt road toward the ranch, followed closely by his mother. "Mr. Caleb," the boy shouted, dust rising from his small feet. Caleb's heart lifted as he dropped his tools and hurried to meet them. "Mateo, what are you doing here?" Caleb asked, concern mingled with joy. "We wanted to see you," Mateo panted, grinning. "Mom says we have to thank you properly. And I wanted to see the ranch. She says you're like a hero." Caleb chuckled softly, ruffling the boy's hair. "Well," he said, smiling, "I don't know about hero, but I do know a promise is a promise. Come on, let's get you both inside before the desert swallows you up in dust." Inside the ranch house, they settled near the fireplace. Mateo spoke animatedly about his time in town, school, new friends, and the small joys of safety he had never known before. His mother described the work she had found, the moments of confidence she was slowly reclaiming, and the gratitude that filled her heart. Caleb listened, smiling quietly, aware that in saving them, he had not only altered their lives but his own. He had discovered that the act of protecting, of standing firm for others, could restore a sense of purpose he had long thought lost. Days turned into weeks, and Caleb began teaching Mateo small skills on the ranch. The boy learned to feed the cattle, mend fences, and understand the signs of approaching weather. Caleb's voice, once reserved and solitary, now carried guidance, warmth, and patience. The boy's laughter, a sound so rare and pure, filled the ranch and seemed to echo across the mesas. Caleb found himself smiling more often, feeling the quiet satisfaction of being needed, of imparting knowledge, and of witnessing courage in the smallest of hearts. One late afternoon, as they repaired a gate together, Mateo looked up with a serious expression. "Mr. Caleb, will you always be here for me?" he asked, the question heavy with the memory of fear they had endured. Caleb knelt beside him, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "As long as it matters," he said gently. "You and your mom. Nothing will take you from safety while I'm here." Mateo smiled and hugged him tightly, and Caleb felt a sense of fulfillment, unlike anything he had known. It was more than survival now. It was about building bonds, healing wounds, and teaching someone that courage and hope could persist even after the darkest moments. The following months were filled with quiet triumphs and small victories. Caleb helped the mother navigate the logistics of independent living, finding work, securing stable housing, and managing life without fear. Mateo thrived under Caleb's guidance, learning not only practical skills but lessons in resilience, empathy, and bravery. And Caleb, though older and aware of his own limitations, found new energy in his role as protector, teacher, and friend. The ranch became a sanctuary, a place where lives could flourish, and where courage and kindness were as vital as water and food. One evening, as the sun set in fiery streaks across the desert, Caleb, Mateo, and his mother sat on the porch together. The boy ran ahead to feed the cattle, calling greetings to each one, laughter ringing through the air. The mother leaned against Caleb, eyes shining with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you enough," she said softly. "You saved our lives, not just from those men, but from fear, from despair." Caleb shook his head, looking out over the mesa. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I did what anyone should do. You survived because you were brave, and I just made sure that promise was kept." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "You are extraordinary, Caleb. You gave us a chance at life we thought we'd lost forever." Caleb felt a quiet pride swell in his chest. He realized that life's value was not measured in years spent alone, or in hardships endured silently, but in the courage to act when it matters most, the willingness to stand for others, and the capacity to create hope in despair. For the first time in decades, he felt a sense of belonging, a fulfillment that had nothing to do with fences, storms, or solitude. Mateo returned from the fields, a small bundle of wildflowers in his hands. He handed them to Caleb, grinning. "For you," he said. Because you saved us, and because you're the best rancher in the world. Caleb took the flowers, inhaling their delicate fragrance. They were fragile, yet beautiful, a perfect symbol of resilience and life. Thank you, Mateo, he said quietly. These are perfect. As night fell, the desert sky came alive with stars, the air carrying the faint scent of sage and sand. Caleb sat on the porch, Mateo at his side, his mother leaning against him, and allowed himself to simply be. For the first time in a long while, there was no fear, no urgent threat, no relentless chase. There was only peace, safety, and the profound knowledge that courage, love, and humanity could endure even in the harshest landscapes. Caleb thought of the past weeks, the danger, the desert, the chase, and the nights of sleepless vigilance, and realized that every moment had led to this: a boy laughing again, a mother smiling without fear, and a rancher who had rediscovered purpose and connection. He understood that true heroism was not about recognition or fame, but about the willingness to stand when others could not, to protect when others feared, and to offer love and courage without hesitation. The desert, once a place of isolation and harsh survival, had become a witness to bravery, hope, and the transformative power of human kindness. Caleb Turner had faced the darkness and emerged not just unbroken, but renewed. And as the stars shimmered above, the boy and his mother safe and thriving, he knew, without doubt, that even in the harshest, loneliest places, humanity could flourish when guided by courage, compassion, and unwavering heart. Caleb looked at Mateo, now quietly watching the cattle, and then at his mother, smiling with genuine relief and gratitude. He realized that in protecting them, he had found a deeper purpose for himself. Life would continue, challenges would come, but he was no longer alone in his purpose. He had a family of choice, a bond forged in danger and strengthened by trust, and that bond would endure long after the desert had forgotten the echoes of their struggle. And so, under the vast night sky, the Turner Ranch stood not only as a place of land and livestock, but as a sanctuary, a testament to courage, love, and the enduring power of human kindness. In the desert's stillness, Caleb whispered once more, "Over my dead body," a vow carried not in anger or threat, but in unwavering devotion to those who could not defend themselves. A promise that would endure as long as life and hope remained.